Imagine this, you are one of the 2.3 billion people across the globe who read the Bible. But did you know that this sacred text contains references to slavery? Yes, it's true. The Bible, revered by many, touches on a topic that often raises eyebrows and creates a sense of unease: slavery. It's a challenging subject, no doubt, but like all things in life and faith, it's one that merits our attention and understanding. Slavery in the Bible is a fact. It is mentioned in several books, including Leviticus, Exodus, and Ephesians. Let's dig a little deeper into these verses to better understand their context. In the book of Leviticus, chapter 25, verse 44, it reads, "Your male and female slaves are to come from the nations around you. From them you may buy slaves." This verse, at first glance, seems to endorse slavery. However, we must remember that it was written during a time when societal norms were dramatically different from today's standards. Slavery was a common practice worldwide, and this verse reflects the societal norms of that era. In Exodus chapter 21, verses 2 to 6, the Bible further discusses slavery, outlining the regulations on the treatment of Hebrew slaves. The text emphasizes that after 6 years of service, a Hebrew slave is to be granted freedom. This verse indicates an effort to regulate and eventually phase out slavery among the Hebrews, a stark contrast to the unrestricted slavery practices of surrounding nations. Lastly, in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 5, the Bible states, "Slaves, obey your earthly masters with respect and fear, and with sincerity of heart, just as you would obey Christ." This verse is often misunderstood as an endorsement of slavery. In reality, it was a practical instruction for slaves living in a society where slavery was an entrenched institution. It was a call for them to maintain their dignity and integrity, even in the face of oppression. So, we see that the Bible does speak about slavery, but the context is crucial to understanding its stance. It's essential to recognize that these verses were written in a different era, under different societal norms. The Bible's teachings on slavery are not endorsements, but reflections of the times in which they were written. As we move forward in our discussion, let's keep this historical context in mind. While the Bible acknowledges slavery, it's crucial to remember that it never promotes or endorses it. In fact, the Bible's references to slavery are more complex than they might initially appear. When we delve into the text, we find that the Bible often uses slavery as a metaphor, particularly in the New Testament. Here, slavery is utilized not to depict a physical state, but rather a spiritual one. It's a representation of spiritual bondage to sin and the freeing power of salvation. In the book of Romans, for example, Apostle Paul uses the metaphor of slavery to illustrate the contrast between being a slave to sin and a servant to righteousness. This metaphorical interpretation is not a whitewashing of the text, but an attempt to understand the context in which it was written. The Bible was penned in a time when slavery was a societal norm. It was an aspect of the economic, social, and political fabrics of societies across the world. However, it's important to note that the Bible's depiction of slavery differs significantly from the brutal chattel slavery that marred our history. Biblical laws required fair treatment of slaves and even provided avenues for their freedom. In Leviticus, for example, it is stipulated that Hebrew slaves were to be released in the year of Jubilee, which occurred every 50th year. In the book of Exodus, we see God liberating the Israelites from their enslavement in Egypt, a clear demonstration of His heart for the oppressed. The Bible also contains numerous exhortations to treat everyone, including slaves, with kindness, respect, and love, as seen in the epistle to the Ephesians. So while the Bible does acknowledge slavery, it does so in the context of the society of the time, and it certainly doesn't champion or glorify the practice. Instead, it offers rules to regulate it, ensuring humane treatment, and it frequently uses it as a metaphor to illustrate spiritual truths. Thus, the Bible's references to slavery served more as a reflection of societal norms rather than a promotion of the practice. But what if we look at this issue from a different perspective? Instead of seeing the Bible's references to slavery as an endorsement, we could interpret them as opportunities for moral growth and spiritual liberation. Some theologians argue that the Bible uses the concept of slavery not to condone it, but to teach lessons about mercy, compassion, and justice. Consider the story of Joseph. Sold into slavery by his own brothers, he eventually rises to prominence in Egypt and uses his position to save his family during a famine. Joseph's story is not about the righteousness of slavery, but about the power of mercy and forgiveness. or take the laws regarding Hebrew slaves in the book of Exodus. These laws were not about promoting slavery, but about limiting it. They introduced a concept that was revolutionary at the time. The idea that slaves had rights, that they were not mere property. This was a stark contrast to the norms of surrounding nations. And let's not forget the book of Philemon, where the Apostle Paul sends a runaway slave back to his master, not as a slave, but as a brother in Christ. This was a radical message in a society where slaves were seen as less than human. These stories and laws challenged the status quo, pushing society towards a more equitable view of humanity. They used the context of slavery to teach lessons about compassion, mercy, and justice. Of course, this doesn't negate the pain and suffering caused by slavery throughout history, but it does suggest that the Bible's references to slavery are not as straightforward as they might seem. We need to read these passages with a critical eye, taking into account their historical and cultural context. Only then can we fully understand their meaning, so perhaps we can see these references not as endorsements of slavery, but as calls to rise above such practices and strive for a more equitable society. In this light, the Bible's references to slavery become not a stumbling block, but a stepping stone towards a deeper understanding of God's love for all humanity. So perhaps we can see these references not as endorsements of slavery, but as calls to rise above such practices and strive for a more equitable society. So, how do we reconcile slavery in the Bible with our modern understanding of human rights? To understand this, we must first appreciate the historical context of the Bible and its teachings. The Bible was written over a span of centuries, during which societal norms and structures were vastly different from today's. Slavery was an integral part of many ancient societies, including those in which the Bible was conceived. However, it's crucial to note that the Bible's acknowledgement of slavery does not equate to its endorsement. Instead, it reflects the realities of the time, serving as a mirror to the societal structures of the era. The Bible, while offering guidance for life, does not shy away from the harsh realities of human existence, including the existence of slavery. But let's delve deeper into the Bible's overarching themes, which are love, justice, and equality. The Bible consistently calls for the fair treatment of individuals, irrespective of their status. In the book of Colossians, for instance, the Apostle Paul instructs, "Masters, provide your slaves with what is right and fair, because you know that you also have a master in heaven." This verse and others like it underscore the Bible's emphasis on equitable treatment even within the societal structures of the time. They also hint at a transcendental equality that, in the eyes of God, all are equal, slave or master. Moreover, the Bible's message of liberation and freedom, as prominently displayed in the Exodus story, contradicts the notion of endorsing slavery. This narrative underscores the Bible's stand against oppression and its call for justice and freedom. So when we grapple with the issue of slavery in the Bible, it's essential to remember the broader themes of love, justice, and equality that permeate its pages. We should interpret the Bible's messages in light of these values, using them as our compass. It's clear then that while the Bible acknowledges slavery, it does not endorse it, and instead encourages us to strive for a world where all humans are treated with dignity and respect. It's been an enlightening journey, hasn't it? We've delved into the verses, reinterpreted biblical slavery, and viewed it from different perspectives. By reconciling slavery in the Bible, we've gained a deeper understanding. This exploration doesn't end here. Continue to question, to seek, to learn. It's through such questioning that we grow in wisdom and understanding. Let's keep questioning, keep exploring, for the journey is as important as the destination. Remember, when it comes to understanding the Bible, context is key. Only then can we fully appreciate its timeless wisdom and guidance.